Undercover boss orders breakfast inside a busy diner, freezes when the cook admits he hasn't been paid in weeks. 7:52 a.m. A Wednesday morning. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. Its light slipped through the treetops, casting dappled patterns on the dusty front window of Morning Brew Calf Branch No. 4 and the oldest in the entire system, founded by Michael Foster, 50 years old since day one. Today, he sat at the last table, a small wooden table by the window, his back facing the bar counter. No one noticed him. No one recognized him. He didn't bring an assistant. No security. No chairman badge like at corporate meetings. Just a middle-aged man in a faded gray jacket, a worn-out baseball cap, and a soft leather notebook full of scribbles and strike-throughs. He ordered something simple, a plate of buttered toast, crispy, and a black coffee, no sugar. Exactly what he used to brew with his own hands every morning for the first 5 years of building this brand, when the first calf had only him and 2 employees. The coffee came in a cream-colored ceramic mug, still steaming. The toast smelled rich with butter cut diagonally plated with elegance, but no pretense. Michael opened his notebook. He was about to jot down a few quick notes on food quality when a faint sound coming from behind made him stop. A young woman's voice, soft but full of tension, whispered, as if even she was afraid to hear herself, "I can't go home tonight if I don't get tips. I mean it." He froze with his spoon midair, not from surprise, but because that voice carried something unsettling, not a complaint, but a kind of suppressed despair disguised skillfully as casual talk. He tilted his head slightly, just enough that no one would notice, but enough to observe from the corner of his eye. A young girl wearing a beige uniform and a light brown apron stood beside the POS machine. Her hair was neatly tied back, her eyes fixed on the screen, but her hand was gripping a pen so tight her knuckles turned white. Another coworker beside her seemed about to say something, but instead sighed quietly and fell silent. Then, as if nothing had happened, the girl turned, walked softly to the service counter, and poured coffee for the next table.
Still that gentle smile. Still those soft, attentive eyes.
No one noticed, except Michael. He watched more closely. Her name was Emily, according to the name tag on her apron. She worked with nothing out of place, took orders accurately, remembered the habits of regulars, suggested items with subtle grace. But just a few seconds of attention revealed she always chose to stand in dim corners when taking orders. When customers tried to hand her tips directly, she gently shook her head. And every time a guest walked away, her eyes would flick toward the back counter where another woman sat browsing a laptop, not wearing an apron, but a name tag that read in bold, "Carla Shift Manager." Michael set his spoon down. He no longer cared about the toast. All that filled his mind now was one question: why would an employee fear not being able to go home if she didn't get tips, and more importantly, in my own system, could that possibly be happening? He checked the time. 7:59 a.m. The calf was getting busy. The door chime rang every 2 minutes. The aroma of espresso deepened. Emily moved gracefully between tables as if she had never uttered those words. Only greetings. Only service. But Michael couldn't unhear that one sentence. Not because he was especially sentimental, but because he knew in the F&B world things stay broken if the CEO doesn't see them firsthand. And if something could drive a server to depend so heavily on tips that she couldn't go home without them, then the system might be hiding something deeply wrong. Michael flipped open his notebook and wrote the first line: branch, no. 4, check tip distribution system. Meet with Emily. Verify shift supervisor records, Carla. A few nearby customers began calling for service. Emily bowed her head, poured water, smiled, then suddenly froze for a second as her hand trembled slightly. No one noticed. But Michael did. A small action. But not the kind that belongs to someone who is healthy, safe, and stable. Michael took a sip of his coffee, now cold. He didn't wince. He simply looked out the window, the sunlight now brighter, reaching the edge of his table. But he knew sunlight wasn't enough to expose what was quietly happening behind the bar where someone needed help, but was standing straight, as if everything was fine. Mornings at Morning Brew Cafe always began with a familiar symphony, the soft ding of the entrance bell, with every new customer, the drip of coffee falling into glass carafes, and the gentle clink of porcelain cups tapping their saucers. This was one of the very first branches Michael Foster had built with his own hands. And now he had returned not as a CEO, but as a silent, regular observing. The glass doors welcomed the slant of early sunlight casting pale golden stripes across the wooden tables. Warm tones, beige and light brown from the interior made the place feel familiar, comforting. At first glance, it looked like the textbook example of a peaceful morning cafe. But no one knew that peace was only surface deep. Michael Foster, founder of Morning Brew, age 50, sat at the last table wearing a faded gray sweater, khaki pants, and an old baseball cap. His round glasses made him look more like a writer in search of inspiration than a CEO monitoring his own chain. No one recognized him. No one paid attention. And that's how he liked it. Because he wasn't there to be noticed, but to hear the things employees would never say in a meeting. The supporting characters began to emerge like layers of a naturally unfolding stage play. 1. Emily, morning shift waitress. About 23 years old. Tall, slender, with dark brown hair tied back in a thin elastic. Her eyes were kind, but couldn't hide the dark circles beneath them, as if she'd long been used to working endless shifts without proper rest. Emily moved gracefully between tables. Her smile was always ready, but her eyes blinked rapidly whenever someone mentioned wages, hours, or tips. Michael noticed every time a customer reached for their wallet to tip her directly, she would gently shake her head, then glance quickly toward the back counter where Carla sat at a laptop, never wearing an apron, eyes locked on the POS terminal. 2. Marcus, head chef. He'd worked here for 4 years, according to Michael's records. A man in his early 30s, wearing a black apron, always keeping his back turned when someone entered the kitchen. Whenever Emily handed in an order, he just nodded, never asked questions. Never commented on dishes. And every time someone brought up pay or procedures, Marcus would just grunt and turn away as if something had happened before, but he didn't want to talk about it. 3. An elderly customer, Mr. Joe. He always sat at the bar on the same stool by the window. In front of him, a cup of herbal tea, no sugar, and a small piece of muffin cut from a larger one, like always. Michael knew Mr. Joe. Not well, but his name appeared often in customer feedback reports, always noting friendly, cozy, but prices a bit high. Today, Mr. Joe leaned in and whispered to Michael, not knowing he was speaking to the owner. That girl's a good one. Polite to everyone. But last week I saw her eating leftover pastry at the end of her shift. No one forced Emily to eat scraps, but it seemed she had to. And no one said anything, because everyone knew but no one dared to ask. Things started to feel more off as Michael paid closer attention. Emily stood counting tip money in the break room, not under the main lights, but beneath a dim yellow bulb. Every time she finished counting, she stuffed the bills quickly into her apron and rushed out as if she had just done something wrong. A young customer, after finishing breakfast, smiled and handed her a $5 tip. She was about to take it when Carla, the shift manager, stepped in from behind and said coldly, "Tips will be pooled and split at the end of the day. Please leave it here." The customer hesitated but reluctantly placed the money into the small box on the counter. Emily glanced briefly at Michael, a tangled look in her eyes. She lowered her head without a word, then turned away. Michael quickly jotted into his notebook. Carla forbids accepting individual tips. Tips are pooled, but the distribution is unclear. Employees show signs of hesitation, avoiding questions about their rights. Emily acts afraid of being seen when handling cash. What began as an ordinary morning was now a layered play with a cast of silent characters. No one was lying outright, but everyone was holding something back, as if there was a thin line between what could be said and what couldn't. Michael sipped his coffee, still the same flavor, but this time it tasted more bitter. Because clearly a system he once took pride in for its humanity was now exposing a crack. And people like Emily were slipping through it. The clock struck 8:31 a.m. Michael Foster sat quietly at his usual table, the one he always chose when he wanted to observe a branch like a stranger. The coffee in his cup had cooled, but inside his thoughts were heating up. The unease had quietly built with each small detail that morning. Emily's trembling voice, Marcus's evasive gaze, Carla's strange behavior. And then it came. Not loud, not dramatic, but in a quiet question from a young barista wiping down the espresso machine. He leaned slightly toward Emily, his voice low, just enough for Michael to catch. They won't let you take the evening shift. Emily was stacking cups. She froze for less than a second, then gave a faint smile, but there was no joy in it. Shift lead said, I'm not capable. But you know the truth, don't you? I didn't complain. I just asked a few questions about tips. She shook her head. I already know what the real reason is. Michael lowered his notebook, leaned slightly back in his chair to catch the reflection in the ceiling mirror above the bar. Emily stood upright, but her eyes didn't focus anywhere. Her fingers gripped the tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. Not because she had just confessed a secret, but because she had gotten too used to keeping that secret inside. Right then, Mr. Joe, the elderly customer at the bar, suddenly spoke up as if he could no longer hold it in that girl once asked to work nights so she could afford rent. But she was rejected. No reason, no explanation. Here, anyone who speaks too much gets moved around. If you're lucky, from morning to afternoon. If not, you vanish from the schedule. He took a sip of tea and muttered, too clean is usually a sign of dirt being hidden. Michael nodded gently. A simple sentence from an elderly man, but one that hit like a warning bell. A system once designed for transparency was now under the hands of a single manager, turning into a tool of control. Michael remembered Carla had once been up for promotion, but her application was halted because of an anonymous complaint. Now he realized he had been right to pause it. He glanced over at Carla. She was seated in the manager's section, fingers gliding rapidly across her laptop, eyes occasionally scanning the room. Every time a staff member approached, Carla would look up, once say nothing, but everyone seemed to understand and instinctively stepped back. Michael wrote more in his notebook. Review shift distribution at branch 4. Cross-check Emily's actual hours for the past 30 days. Verify the previous complaint involving Carla. When Emily passed by bringing coffee to a nearby table, Michael noticed another detail, this time a small tear on the edge of her apron stitched up unevenly by hand. No one noticed. But he understood the poor don't wear torn clothes. They mend them so they can keep working. Michael had witnessed hundreds of moving stories throughout his 20-plus-year career. But Emily's eyes trying to do right, yet suffocated inside a system he had built, kept him from staying still. A female customer, about 30, stood up, handed Emily a $10 bill. Thank you, you were wonderful. This is just for you. Emily gave a faint smile, reached for it, but Carla suddenly stepped in, cutting her off. Sorry, tips must go in the pool. It's company policy. Thanks for understanding. The customer frowned as if she wanted to argue, but simply nodded. Emily accepted the money, placed it in the communal tip box, a flicker of resignation in her eyes, and walked away. Michael paused. She didn't resist. Not because she was afraid to, but because she knew resistance wouldn't change anything. That's what was truly frightening. He wrote the final line on that page: when employees no longer believe speaking up makes a difference, that's when the system begins to rot. The silence in the cafe now was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. Lingering, unspoken. Michael knew he couldn't leave today without getting to the root of the problem. Viewers by now not only felt sympathy for Emily, they saw themselves in her eyes. Everyone has at some point been trapped inside an unfair system, not because they were wrong, but because they weren't heard. Michael Foster had always believed if a system works properly, the truth will be visible right there on the table. But if something is being hidden, he knows he must go deeper, not with the power of a CEO, but with the quiet watchfulness of an observer. That's how his investigation began, one small step at a time, one private conversation, one seemingly innocent question. The first was Leo, the morning prep cook. Around 28 years old, square-faced skin darkened from standing too close to the fire. Michael happened to sit beside him in the staff break area where the old yellow lights cast shadows on the peeling ceiling. He opened casually, his tone light, like talking about the weather. Breakfast here is really solid. You all work well together. Leo gave a small nod and smiled. Yeah, we're used to it. But it's stressful, sir. There were weeks we got shorted on pay and no one explained why. Michael tilted his head slightly, feigning confusion. Shorted, you mean incorrect clock ends? Leo hesitated, then looked down. No. It was because the tips were pooled wrong. Everyone knows. One time, Miss Emily cried in the break room. Her paycheck was shorted by dozens of dollars. They said it was a technical error, but that error only showed up under her name. Not because the amount was small, but because it was taken from her with no explanation. Michael wrote in his notebook, Emily unclear wage deductions, check POS history. The second person was Ben, a young barista with glasses, always smiling but cautious when speaking. Michael started a casual conversation while Ben was wiping down the coffee grinder. Have the recent shifts been busy? Ben nodded, responding briefly. But when Michael asked, are daily tips okay? Ben stopped. His eyes darted around, then he whispered, actually lately, we've noticed the tip sharing is really strange. Some days are packed, we're running around non-stop, but by the end, I only get $3. I once printed a shift report just out of curiosity. The next day, I was called into the office. Carla said I was unauthorized to access internal systems. Michael kept a calm face. But inside, he knew Morning Brew's POS system allows every employee to print their own shift summary. There was nothing wrong with that. I never told anyone. I've stayed quiet since then. I'm scared they'll switch my shift like they did with Emily. Michael wrote another note, manager monitoring system access, investigate reason for Ben's warning. Emily continued working still, the gentle, attentive server with a soft smile. But every step she took left a question in its wake. Why didn't she push back? Why didn't she leave this unjust system? Michael found the answer in a very brief exchange, but one that left him silent long after. When Emily brought him coffee for the second time, he asked gently, do you live alone? Emily was slightly surprised, then nodded, yes, I've been on my own for years. Do you ever feel so tired you just want to quit? She smiled, but this time her eyes gave her away. I'm not sure anymore. As long as I can still work, that's enough, sir. A short sentence. Not tragic, not bitter, but quietly pulled back a painful truth. Sometimes people choose to endure not because they're weak, but because they no longer believe they have any other choice. By the end of the morning, shift around 11:40 a.m., the crowd had thinned. The cafe was closing temporarily for cleaning before lunch. Michael remained seated. He didn't order anything else. He just observed. He saw Emily step out through the back, not the main exit, but a narrow path leading to the alley. She leaned softly against a gray brick wall, unlocked her phone, and opened a PDF, a freshly sent pay stub. She stared at the screen for less than 10 seconds, then slowly raised her hand to wipe her eyes. No sobbing. No falling tears. Only the motion of someone trying to hold in everything until they couldn't anymore. Michael never looked away, and he knew this was the moment. He could not stay silent any longer. The audience by now didn't just feel sorry for Emily. They wanted to act, to help her. The Follow the CEO as he uncovers the truth effect had reached its peak. Each piece, from the prep cook's words to the barista's account to Emily's quiet struggle, had come together into one clear image, a long-standing abuse of power happening in silence. Michael wrote the final sentence on the page, a good system doesn't let anyone wipe their tears in the dark. And he closed the notebook. Tomorrow he would return, but not as a stranger anymore. 8:02 a.m. The next day. Morning Brew Cafe opened as usual. The sound of the coffee grinder had started at 7:45. The smell of buttered pastries had begun to spread.
Staff were arranging tables and chairs, preparing for a new shift.
No one noticed the black SUV parked outside earlier than usual. No one recognized the man stepping out this time with no hat, no old sweater, no leather notebook. Michael Foster, 50 years old, founder and CEO of the entire Morning Brew chain, appeared in a charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, no tie. His stride was calm, but his gaze said he would tolerate no delay. He didn't sit at the old table. He walked straight inside, His voice rang out not loud, but firm and cold. I need all current staff, including the shift manager, to come to the front of house. Right now. Carla, seated at the counter, her eyes widened, unable to hide her confusion. Is something wrong? Sir Michael didn't answer immediately. He waited until everyone, Emily, Ben, Marcus, even the cleaner, stood before him. A few had begun to whisper, but no one dared ask aloud. Suddenly, the calf turned silent. Michael looked around, not glancing, but pausing on each face. Then finally, he turned to Carla. His voice was low but steady as stone. I have a few questions about the way tips are distributed here. Carla swallowed hard. She stood up straight, but her hands nervously clasped each other in front of her apron. And Michael continued, I want to know why one Morning Brew employee has to survive on cash. No insurance. No chance to take extra shifts. No way to respond to wage discrepancies. Emily flinched slightly. Ben stared at the floor tiles. Marcus turned away. No one dared breathe loudly. Carla gave a stiff smile. I think Emily chose that arrangement, sir. She said she preferred flexible hours and receiving tips directly. Michael tilted his head slightly, his gaze unwavering. Is that so? Yes. I just did what she requested. A classic deflection, but this time it landed on the one person who held every fact. Michael calmly reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then mirrored the screen onto the POS monitor above the counter. Edit history shift schedules 3 consecutive weeks. Editor name Carla. Next, he placed 3 printed documents on the counter. Tip transfer logs. Emily's wage breakdown. A compliance alert from the head office regarding unauthorized access to system records, signed off by Carla. No raised voice. Just the truth laid bare in the middle of the calf, the same place that just 24 hours ago had felt like a peaceful space. Carla began to stumble, genuinely shaken. I don't clearly remember, I just thought Michael raised his hand. He didn't need any more excuses. I remember Morning Brew was built to make every single tip transparent, no unclear splits, no flexible hours dictated by a single person. And most importantly, no one should ever be forced into a single choice, stay silent, or lose their job. Emily had been silent the entire time. Her hands clenched the edge of her apron. Her back, slightly hunched, eyes cast down. But Michael turned to her. His voice softened for the first time that morning. Emily, did you ever ask to be paid in cash instead of by direct deposit? She shook her head gently. Her voice barely above a whisper. No, sir. I only asked why my tips didn't match the hours I worked. Michael turned back, his gaze fixed on Carla. There were no more doubts. The audience, as if standing inside the calf, witnessed a distorted system being exposed with calm and undeniable clarity. He addressed all the staff, not just Carla. I didn't come back here to point fingers. I came back for one reason. Morning Brew is a brand I built from a borrowed espresso machine, not to become a place where employees cry over their paychecks. No one said a word. Michael gave one final look around the room. I need one day to reset everything. Lunch shift today is canceled. All staff will still be fully paid. As for the shift manager position, effective immediately suspended, Carla stood frozen. No one defended her. No one protested. The silence now was the loudest voice in the room. No more excuses. No more vague justifications. Only hard evidence and one man standing in front of everyone, calm but with an icy resolve. Michael Foster didn't need to argue. He opened his brown leather briefcase, placed it on the counter, and one by one pulled out a set of documents, each page like a brick, tapping against the silent walls of Morning Brew Cap. First document, a 21-day tip summary, printed directly from the POS system. Each day had one thing in common. Emily's tip count was unusually low, despite serving double the tables of her coworkers. Michael pointed at the column edited by C. Carla Carter, shift manager. Second document, a USB drive connected to the POS screen. He played an internal security video taken from the back kitchen camera. On screen, Emily working from 7:0 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., 5 days in a row. But on the official schedule, her shift was only recorded until 5:0 p.m. She didn't get clocked in, but she stayed still serving, still cleaning like the evening shift. Ben whispered beside him as if speaking more to himself than to anyone else. Third document, Emily's official payslip from the Morning Brew central payroll system. It listed 18 total shifts, 6 evening shifts, but the overtime bonus section was left blank. Next to it was a different payslip, the one Carla had emailed Emily directly bypassing the official payroll system. It included a strange deduction line advance adjustment, $83, no reason. No attached documentation. Michael looked up, his eyes locking onto Carla. Can you explain to me why an employee's money was advanced without their knowledge? Carla froze. Her throat tightened. She glanced toward Emily, still standing near the narrow door leading to the staff room. For the first time, everything that had been hidden in the dark was brought to light with evidence no one could deny. Carla tried to compose herself. I was only doing what I thought was necessary to make things fair for the whole shift. Michael's voice didn't change. He unfolded one final document. This is an email from 2 former employees they left 3 months ago. Their message got switched to another shift after asking about tips. Didn't dare speak up, afraid of getting terminated. Did you think I wouldn't know, that it would all just go away quietly? No one responded. No sound from the espresso machine. No murmurs from customers. No indifferent looks from coworkers. Only Michael remained, and a truth that could no longer hide. Emily stood still. Her hands gripped the edge of her apron. Her lips tightened as if she wanted to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Not from fear, but from emotion. For the first time, someone spoke up for her. For the first time, the quiet suffering she had endured for months was given a name. For the first time, she didn't feel like a misfit in a system that had always been broken. Carla, pale as paper, no longer tried to defend herself. She stepped back slightly, eyes scanning the calf, but no one looked at her the same anymore. Marcus, the cook, quietly removed his apron, laid it on the counter, then pulled out his phone and played a recording he had saved 8th of this month, 5:49 p.m. Carla's voice, if you ask about tip sharing again, I'll switch your shift immediately. Don't think I won't do it. Michael didn't need anything else. The wrongdoer wasn't shouted down, wasn't thrown out in dramatic fashion, but exposed by her own actions and undeniable data. And most importantly, the good no longer needed to defend themselves because the system had finally spoken for them. Michael slowly gathered the documents, and he said one line, not to Carla, but to everyone: fairness doesn't need to be loud, just clear-eyed and backed by the truth. He turned to Emily, her eyes now teary, but she still stood tall. You don't have to apologize for what you endured. Just remember, from now on, you no longer have to be silent. The calf remained quiet, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not fear, relief. Like a boulder had finally been lifted from every chest. The truth was out. No more excuses. No more blurry justifications. Morning Brew, once considered a model store in the chain, had revealed a deep fracture. Not from technical errors, but from people staying silent for too long. Michael Foster looked around the room once more, but this time with the eyes of a founder, not just a CEO. He stepped forward slowly but deliberately. In front of all the staff, standing in stillness, their eyes full of emotion, he placed his hand on Emily's shoulder. His voice was calm, steady, but gentle as morning mist. From now on, every hour you work will be recorded fully, accurately, and transparently. You will no longer have to live off scattered kindness day by day. Emily held her breath. Her eyes were red, brimming with emotion. But this time, she didn't look down. For the first time, she looked straight at the person standing up for her. Michael turned to the entire team. No more barriers between him and them. I didn't build Morning Brew to expand the fastest. I built it so that anyone who brews a cup of coffee here can actually live with dignity. He stepped up to the bar where the POS screen still showed the current orders and tapped the navigation button. Starting today, the tip-sharing system will update in real time. Every transaction, every dollar in tips will have the recipient's name clearly attached. The whole calf seemed to exhale, not with cheers, not with applause, but with a deep collective sigh of relief. Ben, the barista, who was once warned for printing his own tip summary, was now personally handed a new POS access badge by Michael, open and transparent. Marcus, the quiet cook, spoke up. "For the first time, we thank you for coming back, sir." Emily still stood there, but now she wasn't trembling. She looked around, then slowly took off her old, worn apron and replaced it with a brand new uniform top pulled fresh from the storage room in official morning brew, midnight blue.
A single tear rolled down her cheek, not out of helplessness, but because finally she was recognized.
Michael checked his watch. The hands pointed to exactly 9:47 a.m. He nodded to the senior manager beside him, reopened the caf at 10:00. But today, every team member gets 15 minutes to write down what they believe Morning Brew should stand for. Not just revenue goals. The room no longer felt like a morning coffee shop. It felt like a team locker room right after the captain defended the most vulnerable player and the whole team won without even needing to score. Michael didn't need to say much more. Just one final sentence spoken slowly like a message meant for everyone watching this story. A good breakfast isn't about the food. It's about how you treat the person who got up at 5 a.m. to make it 9:58 a.m. Michael stepped out of the caf. The morning sunlight lit up the old Oakwood sign Morning Brew Cafest, 2008, shining as if it were brand new. He paused at the doorstep, inhaled deeply the scent of freshly roasted coffee, the smell he used to wake up to every single morning more than a decade ago. And behind him, for the first time in many years, applause broke out. Not for fame, not for a moving speech, but for a man who had the courage to say what was right at a time when everyone else was still silent.